At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFI without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. The rain hammered down. Each drop was a cold rivet driven into Remy Falco's helmet. The noise a constant frantic drum against the thunder of departing ships. Mud, a slurry of ash and planetary soil, sucked at his boots. He shoved another simian refugee, a shivering elder whose fine silver-white fur was matted and dark, up the transport ramp. The ship's engines washed the landing pad in a blast of heat, a fleeting comfort against the world's encroaching chill. "That's the last of 'em, Sergeant," a crewman shouted over the engine scream, his voice a tiny rasp. Through Remy's comms, "Ramp's coming up." Remy gave a final push, sending the elder stumbling into the waiting arms of a medic. He turned, ready to follow, his boots squelching in the mire. Vapor and grit choked the bruised purple sky. Just the trails of engine fire tearing holes in the gloom. "Commander Kovar, to all ground teams," his internal comm crackled. "Final pullout. I repeat, this is the final pullout. Concorde fleet is breaking orbit in 40 minutes. Get on your birds. This is the only chance." The order was static sharp and absolute. The fleet was abandoning Seren to its fate. Remy stepped toward the ramp, the magnetic clasps of his boots finding purchase on the grooved metal. "Please." A thin cry pierced the chaos. Remy stopped. Two simians had broken through the overwhelmed security cordon. Grime matted their fine silvery fur, bleached in patches to a sickly grey by stress. They ran toward him, away from the ship. "Please, you must help," the male said, his voice a series of melodic but desperate clicks and whistles. The universal translate in Remy's helmet smoothed it into fluent standard, though the raw desperation in the sound still came through. He clutched at Remy's armored forearm, his 3 fingers and a thumb surprisingly strong. "Our daughter, Zala." "The quake separated us," the female added, her large dark eyes ringed with gold, wide with terror. "The tech district. The ground shook. Our transport had to leave." A muscle in Remy's jaw jumped. He'd heard it a dozen times today. Another family fractured by the cold logic of evacuation. Save the many, abandon the few. Their assigned ship, likely a simian bulk hauler, had followed the collective's logic. "Falco, what's your status?" Kovar cut in, his voice sharp and brittle through the comms. "The ramp is closing." "Sir, I have 2 civilians here. They lost their child." "Negative, Sergeant." The response was instant. "We've recalled all search parties. Time is up. Get on this bird, now." "That's a direct order." The heavy ramp groaned, beginning its ascent. The gap between its edge and the churning mud widened. Remy looked at the 2 parents. Their faces had gone slack with shock, mouths slightly open as they stared at the rising metal barrier. And in his mind, unbidden, flashed an image from his Omni-reader, a picture of his own daughter, Cora, 6 years old, holding up a crayon drawing of a lopsided spaceship among a field of wonky, 5-pointed stars, her gap-toothed grin. The simian father's grip tightened. "They said the humans. They said you stay for everyone." Remy looked from their desperate faces to the closing ramp. The shrinking gap was a final, damning statement. The crewmen inside were already looking away. He met the father's eyes and gave a single curt nod. He turned his back on the transport. He ran from the ship, its engines roaring to a deafening crescendo. He plunged into the shadows of a ruined transit station's frame just as the vessel lifted, its landing struts retracting. The backwash tore at his gear. He kept his focus on the ruins ahead. Alarm shrieked inside the damaged IRC supply depot. The emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that made the toppled shelves of equipment look like the bones of some great leviathan. Remy ignored the alarms, moving without a wasted step as he scanned the depot. He needed specific gear, and had only minutes to find it. He ripped a larger tactical pack from a storage locker, its canvas stiff and new. He stuffed it with dense, vacuum-sealed ration cakes, a full medkit, and every spare power cell he could find. He grabbed a grapnel launcher and checked the line. 100 meters of high tensile synth fiber. Good. From a weapons rack, he pulled a bolt-action M12 energy rifle. An older model, reliable, designed for stopping power. He checked the capacitor. The indicator glowed with 5 faint bars of light. 5 shots. It would have to do. He slung it over his shoulder. His own helmet comm was a direct link to Kovar, to the Perseverance, to the entire departing fleet. A liability. He found a secondary helmet on a diagnostic bench, identical to his own. He slammed its visor against the corner of a metal crate. The polyglass shattered. He keyed its integrated locator beacon, then deliberately bridged 2 contacts on the circuit board with the tip of his knife. The beacon sputtered, its signal now an erratic, dying pulse. He sprinted back out into the deluge. The ground trembled again, a low, grinding growl from deep within the planet's crust. A skyscraper 100 meters from the landing zone groaned, shedding glass and duracrete. Its collapse was imminent. With a grunt, Remy hurled the damaged helmet toward the building's fractured base. It landed in a pile of rubble with a pathetic clatter, its broken beacon still pulsing. He ducked back inside the depot, this time to a communications terminal. He worked the holographic interface, calling up the ground team tracker. He found the beacon's ID, his ID, and used his credentials to initiate a diagnostic flush on the sector relay. He logged a final, garbled transmission from the wrecked beacon's ID, timing the burst of static with the building's collapse. A massive tremor hit. The depot shook, dust raining from the ceiling. On the screen, a red alert flared as the skyscraper collapsed in on itself, with a grinding roar that shook the depot to its foundations. The tracker system registered the events. Corrupted signal from Sergeant Felco's beacon. Catastrophic seismic event at beacon's location. Signal lost. The system flagged his ID, lost in structural failure, and archived the corrupted data packet. It would bury his ghost for at least 72 hours, long enough. Remy stepped outside again. The dust from the collapsed tower was already mixing with the rain, turning it into a fine, grey cement. He looked up. Through a momentary break in the thickest clouds, a single bright star streaked across the sky. The last human ship climbing for orbit. He stared upward until it vanished. The roar of ships vanished. In its place, the groan of stressed metal, the hiss of rain, the distant rush of water. The tech district was a graveyard of ambition. Towers of glass and steel leaned against each other at precarious angles. Debris from a civilization's hasty departure choked the streets, turning them into canals. Water, black and oily, churned through the canyons of commerce. Remy moved through the treacherous landscape, his rifle held at a low ready. He kept to the elevated sky bridges and the more stable-looking rooftops, his boots crunching on shattered glass. His helmet scanner was active, sweeping the area for any sign of simian life. Every groan of a dying building set his teeth on edge. After 2 hours, his search yielded only silence. He paused, his posture sagging with the weight of the dead district. The district was dead. Then a flicker, a faint, intermittent biosignature pulsed on his scanner, originating from the upper floors of a tilted skyscraper across the plaza. The building's spire was bent at a 45-degree angle, its skin peeled back to reveal the structural bones beneath. The signal was too faint for an adult. It had to be a child. He fired the grapnel launcher. The hook bit into the tilted tower's exposed superstructure with a solid thunk. He tested the line, then clipped his harness on and ascended, the rushing water 100 feet below. He found her in a wrecked Skytram car wedged between two floors. The car dangled precariously, its nose pointing down into the abyss. She huddled in the far corner, a small silver shape in the gloom. Her fine fur, normally smooth silver waves, stood up in agitated peaks. She was a shivering knot of terror, her whole body trembling. He stopped at the car's entrance, the wind whistling through the broken windows. He kept his distance, giving her space. Deliberately he reached up and unsealed his helmet, pulling it off. The air was thick with the sharp scent of shorted-out circuitry and standing water. "Hey there," he whispered. He knelt, making himself smaller. "My name is Remy. I'm here to help." She flinched, pressing herself further into the corner, her large gold-ringed eyes fixed on him. He unclipped a purifier water pouch from his belt and held it out. "You must be thirsty." She stared at the pouch, then back at him. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. For a long moment, she remained still. Then, inch by inch, she crept forward. She reached out a small, trembling three-fingered hand and took the pouch. She brushed his hand as she took it. Zala remained silent. She drank the water in small, shivery sips, her eyes fixed on him. Remy sat cross-legged on the Skytram's canted floor, giving her space. His comms stayed silent, as expected. The atmospheric ash and constant electrical storms blocked out all but the tightest beam communication. The storms cut them off. "Zala, right?" he asked. "Your parents sent me." She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She answered his questions in whispered one-word replies. Yes, no, cold, scared. He needed a new approach. He unsealed the pouch on his thigh and pulled out his Omni-reader. He wiped the sweat, and the image of Cora lit up the dim space. She was grinning, a smear of chocolate on her cheek. "This is my daughter," Remy said, his voice softer than he intended. "Her name is Cora." She shifted her gaze from him to the glowing screen. She leaned in a fraction, tilting her head. "I have to go home to her," Remy continued, the words feeling heavy and true in his mouth. "Just like your mom and dad are waiting for you to get home to them. I made them a promise I'd find you. I make it a point to keep my promises." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. She looked from the picture of Cora to his face, her expression shifting from fear to a hesitant curiosity. Zala spoke a full sentence, a soft, melodic whisper, nearly lost to the wind. She pointed a small silver finger at his silent helmet comm. "That is too weak." Remy nodded. "Yeah, the sky is messy right now." "My father worked at the monolith," she said, her voice a sliver stronger. He was an engineer. The monolith can talk to the stars." Remy blinked. He followed her gaze out the broken window. Miles away, piercing the gloom, was a single monumentally tall spire, a needle of a building that scraped the ash cloud's underbelly, the monolith of Serene. "He said its signal is strong enough to break the sky," Zala added. A child's turn of phrase, but the engineering behind it was sound. A focused high-gain transmission array might just punch through the interference. The idea was insane. The tower was miles away, across the capital city's most devastated part, Silene. Remy looked at the distant tower, then at the small silver child beside him, their only chance. The streets were a churning, impulsible torrent of water and debris. Their highway would have to be the rooftops. Remy fired the grapnel launcher, secured lines, and tested them with his full weight before motioning for Zala to follow. At first, he had to carry her. She would cling to his back, her face buried in his pack, her whole body trembling with the dizzying drops. The wind howled through the urban canyons, trying to tear them from their perch. "I need my hands free," he told her during a brief rest on a windswept rooftop garden. Its exotic plants wilted and grey, and you need a help. This will work better if we work together. He uncoiled a shorter length of rope. He took her small hands in ease and guided them through the motions of a simple knot. This is a clove hitch. It's easy to tie, easy to untie, and it holds fast. Watch. Her 3-fingered hands were clumsy at first, but after a few tries her movement smoothed out. She tied the knot again and again, her brow furrowed in concentration, until she could do it without looking. Good, Remy grunted, checking her work. Now your job is to secure the gear pack to the line before we cross. Can you do that? She nodded, her posture straightening. This simple task made her a partner in their survival. The lesson proved its worth an hour later. They were halfway across a zipline strung between a corporate tower and a municipal courthouse when a nearby building gave way. It collapsed with a deafening roar, plunging into the water below and sending a huge wave surging down the street canyon. The wave slammed into the base of their tower. The entire structure shuddered. The wall of water surged upwards, close to their heels. The force of it tore at Remy's grip on the line. He held on, his muscles screaming, the cable cutting into his gloved hands. He glanced back. Zala's mouth was a silent, terrified "oh." Her gear pack, secured to the line behind her by her own freshly tied clove hitch, held fast against the surge's pull. If it had come loose, its weight would have dragged her off in an instant. The wave receded, leaving them drenched and shaking. They found shelter in a recessed executive alcove, shielded from the wind and rain. Night, or what passed for it in the perpetual twilight, had fallen. Remy managed to get a small contained fire going, with a friction igniter, and the splintered remains of a ridiculously large wooden desk. While he worked, a sound echoed up from the flooded depths below. A series of sharp, rhythmic clicks. The sound had a pattern, like sonar. Remy crawled to the shattered window's edge and peered down. The firelight behind him made the darkness below seem even deeper. He activated his helmet's low-light vision. They slithered over the debris islands in the churning water. Pale, slick-skinned creatures with segmented eel-like bodies and 4 short, powerful limbs ending in webbed claws. They were the size of large dogs. They swept their smooth, eyeless heads, dominated by a wide, sonar-emitting jaw, back and forth in time with the clicking sounds they emitted. One of them paused. It cocked its head, its clicks becoming faster, more focused. It lunged. Its forelimbs, tipped with razor-edged claws, plunged into the black water and came up with something slick and writhing. The creature tore into its meal with a series of wet, cracking sounds. Remy pulled back from the edge, a frantic pulse throbbing in his throat. Zala touched his arm. She was beside him, her eyes wide. She whispered a single word, a name spoken with a child's reverence for campfire monsters. "Merkstalkers." "You know them," he whispered back. "Stories," she said, her fur rising in agitated peaks again. "They live in the deep caves. Father said the planet's crust is like a sponge, full of tunnels. They stay deep underground. They shun the light. They hunt by sound and vibration." "The asteroid," he murmured. "The impact. We flooded their homes, drove them to the surface." Zala just nodded, shivering. They had to be silent. The collapsed plaza was their next major obstacle, a wide open space, now a shallow lake, patrolled by a pack of at least a dozen merkstalkers. Their only path across was a narrow sky bridge that had fallen from its moorings, creating a precarious metal walkway just a few feet above the water. This would be the test. He took a moment to prepare. He pulled strips of insulating fabric from a wall panel and wrapped their boots, muffling any sound their steps might make. He looked at Zala, whose eyes were huge and dark. He used gestures, put a finger to his own lips, then pointed to his feet, and then to hers. He mimed walking, placing each foot down with exaggerated care. He would go first. She had to follow his exact path, step where he stepped. She nodded, her eyes fixed and serious. He slung his rifle tightly to his back and stepped into the slick, twisted metal, keeping his center of gravity low and distributing his weight with each careful step. The stalker's clicks below were a constant, unnerving chorus. He could feel the vibrations of their movement through the soles of his boots. He reached the halfway point and turned, beckoning Zala to follow. She was light on her feet, her face set in concentration. Her omni-tool, the one containing the city's blueprints, slipped from the loose pouch at her belt. The metallic clatter on the walkway was loud enough to be a gunshot. Every stalker below froze instantly. A dozen stalkers snapped their heads in their direction. The rhythmic clicking stopped, replaced by silence. He lunged back, grabbing Zala, pulling her tight against him. He clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle her gasp and locked his other arm tight around her small body. They stood frozen. The stalkers moved, their clicks, now sharp, questioning bursts of sound. They swarmed the area directly below the bridge, sweeping their heads back and forth, searching for the noise source. One of them reared up, its claws scraping against the metal underside of their walkway. Zala whimpered against his hand. He held his breath, motionless. They remained frozen for a long, agonizing minute. After a long, tense minute, the pack's questioning clicks faded. Their patrol resumed, their shapes receding into the gloom. Only then did Remy allow himself to exhale. After they reached the far side, they found a secure alcove and fell into a exhausted sleep, waking hours later to the same grey twilight. They found a defensible haven in a fortified executive office suite, high above the waterline. Remy managed to get another small fire going in a metal wastebasket, the flames casting a warm, dancing light on the opulent, ruined room. He took out their last dense ration cake. He broke it in half, ensuring the pieces were equal, and handed one to Zala. She cocked her head. "My father used to do that," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "He always made sure the shares were exact. He said fairness was a form of engineering." The firelight warmed the silver tips of her fur, which now lay smooth and flat. A soft, content hum emanated from her chest. Remy managed a small smile. "Cora, my daughter. She loves to draw," he offered, staring into the flames. "Stars, mostly. Big, messy stars that blaze brightly. She says stars are the seeds of stories." Zala watched him, her dark eyes reflecting the fire. When he finished, she opened her recovered omni-tool. A holographic schematic of a power grid bloomed in the air between them. "My father taught me this," she said, tracing the lines of a primary conduit with her finger. "He taught me the city was a living thing, and these were its veins. He insisted you have to understand how something works before you can fix it." For the first time since he'd found her, she spoke of her home, her voice clear and steady. She told him about her mother, a botanist who cultivated rare Serenian mosses. She told him about her school, about her favorite foods, about the games she played with her friends in the city's shining plazas. And Remy shared stories of Cora, about her terrible, infectious laugh, about the time she tried to build a rocket out of recycled food containers, about the lullaby he sang to her every night. A collapsed sector blocked their path. A whole city section had pancaked. The wreckage presented an impossible barrier of duracrete and twisted steel. Zala, however, had another idea. She consulted the blueprints on her omni-tool. "Here," she said, pointing to a massive structure on the map. "The Grand Archives of Silene. Maintenance tunnels run underneath that connects to the next district. They should be dry. The archives were a colossal building, a monument to knowledge, and eerily, it stood almost completely untouched. The entrance was high enough to have escaped the flood's worst effects. The silence in the building was absolute. A fine layer of grey dust coated every surface, their footsteps the first marks in a generation. They found out why. The simians inside were all still there, sitting at terminals, reading in chairs, walking down hallways. The shockwave had frozen them in their last moments, perfect statues, covered in dust. The initial seismic shockwave from the impact, a force that traveled through the planet's crust faster than the speed of sound, had killed them instantly. A library of ghosts. Remy guided Zella through the solemn halls, trying to shield her from the worst of it, but she looked past the bodies. She was looking at the terminal directories. She led him to a public access engineering hub, her father's name listed on a project. On his workstation screen, a single unsent message waited. The recipient was Zella. I love you. Be brave. Find the monolith. Zella stared at the words, her small hand pressed against the screen. Then her gaze fell on the open diagnostic panel on the display side. In his final moments, alongside his message, he had force-pushed the city's entire engineering library to the only device he was certain she would have, a student model Omnitool, a survival map. Zella squared her shoulders, a familiar determination settled in her gaze, one he recognized in himself. The archive's far maintenance tunnel was dark and narrow. It smelled of stale air and old machinery. As they rounded a corner, a shape blocked their path. A merc stalker, bigger and bulkier than the others, its slick hide thicker, scarred. A sentry, it let out a series of sharp interrogative clicks. An alarm. From the tunnel behind it, a chorus of clicks answered. The pack was coming. Get back! Remy yelled, shoving Zella behind him into a small, defensible alcove with a heavy steel door. Brace that door! Don't open it! He raised the M12 rifle, the cool metal stock pressed against his cheek. The narrow corridor was a perfect choke point. The sentry charged, its 4 powerful limbs churning. Remy fired. The bolt of plasma struck the creature's exposed leg joint. The limb exploded in a shower of pale ichor. The stalker screeched, a high-pitched sound that vibrated in Remy's bones. But it kept coming. The second shot took out a front leg. It stumbled, crashing against the wall. From the darkness behind it, 2 more stalkers surged forward, crawling over their wounded comrade. Remy fired again. The third shot punched through the lead stalker's head. It collapsed, its legs folding under it. 2 shots left. His fourth bolt missed, glancing off the second stalker's armored back with a flash of sparks. The creature was on him. He fired his last charge at point-blank range, but the creature's momentum was too great. It slammed into him, knocking the rifle from his hands. They went down in a desperate, grunting tangle of limbs. Its razor-edged claws tore through his suit, gashing his arm. He roared in pain and anger, fumbling for the combat knife at his belt. He drove the blade up, under the stalker's jaw, with all his strength. Bone crunched wetly. The stalker went limp, its dead weight pinning him to the floor. He shoved the carcass off and staggered back, breathing heavily. The tunnel was silent again. He leaned against the wall, the world spinning slightly, and looked down at his arm. A deep gash soaked his sleeve in dark blood. Remy slumped against the wall, gritting his teeth. The gash on his forearm was a deep, ragged tear. He tried to get his medkit, but a tremor made his hands useless. The clasps were too complex for his trembling fingers. The steel door creaked open. Zella peered out, her eyes wide. The sight of the blood and his trembling steeled her expression. She stepped forward. She knelt beside him, taking the medkit from his fingers. The kit's design was simple, with clear pictographic instructions, and she had it open in a moment. She cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, her touch gentle but firm. Remy hissed, a sharp intake of breath. Zella paused, looked at him, and then continued, her movements even more deliberate. She took out a biosealant patch and applied it to the wound. The sealant stung. Remy clenched his jaw, a low groaning escaping his lips. She worked with an unnerving calm. This tiny child who had seen her world end, now patching up the soldier meant to protect her. When she finished, she repacked the medkit neatly. Remy gave her a weak, grateful smile. She reached out and touched his other arm. Her fur still stood up in places, a mix of smooth silver and agitated peaks, and the hum from her chest was intermittent, a worried stutter. She insisted they rest until the grey light outside had deepened and returned once more. He agreed. They emerged from the tunnels, and there it was, the monolith of Serene. It rose from the center of a vast, flooded plaza, a magnificent needle of dark metal and reinforced glass. It stood monumentally tall and miraculously intact. A grin spread across Remy's face. They had made it. His grin faded. 30 feet of black water submerged the main entrance. The plaza was a deep, circular lake, and the monolith was its island. Zella consulted her omni-tool, her face grim. A sub-level maintenance conduit. It should be above the main flood line, she pointed. There. A dark square opening in the tower's base, just above the waterline. Their only way out. Another problem, she said, tapping the screen. The tower's schematic glowed. The whole monolith is on low-level emergency power. It can only power life support and basic systems, which is insufficient for the primary broadcast array. We need to get the main generator back online. Remy looked at the schematic over her shoulder. Where is it? She traced a path down into the tower's deepest sublevels. Sublevel 5, the main generator room. She stopped, her finger resting on the screen. The room was adjacent to a massive, cavernous space deep below the foundation. The schematic labeled the space geothermal access tunnels. The Merc Stalkers, Remy said. They came up from the deep caves. They've established a nest. Zella nodded, her expression grim. The generator is right next to their new home. The sublevels were a maze of dark, dripping corridors. The air was thick with the smell of damp metal and something else. A strange, organic, musky scent. The clicking was everywhere, echoing through the enclosed spaces. They found the generator room. A fallen support beam partially blocked the massive steel door, and lying on the beam's other side lay a Merc Stalker that dwarfed all the others. It was easily the size of a small vehicle, its slick hide a patchwork of scars. The Queen. She was on her side, breathing in ragged, shallow hisses. The fallen beam had pinned her, crushing part of her thorax. Surrounding her swollen abdomen was a clutch of leathery, pulsating eggs, a silent, defensive circle of large sentry-cast stalkers stood vigil as they swept their heads back and forth, their clicks a low, mournful hum. They were guarding their dying matriarch and the future of their species. Remy raced through the options. Attacking them meant certain death. The guards blocked any path around. The beam was the tactical fulcrum. Relieve the pressure on the matriarch, and you might relieve the pressure on yourself. It was their only chance. He looked at Zella, and she looked at him, her gaze steady. He took a breath. He raised his M12 rifle. The metallic click of him ejecting the capacitor echoed in the silence. He placed the inert weapon and the power pack on the floor. Then he unhooked the heavy pry bar from his pack. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the beam pinning the Queen. The stalker guards tensed. Their clicks sharpened, becoming a low, threatening growl. They stepped forward, a wall of armored hide and claws. Remy froze. Then Zella moved. She stepped past him. She stopped a few feet from the dying queen and crooned a series of low, melodic hums. Her fine fur, raised in peaks of tension, smoothed out. The worried, stuttering hum from her chest deepened into the steady, melodic sound he'd heard by the fire. The queen's ragged breathing seemed to calm slightly. The guards' growling clicks subsided, returning to their mournful hum. They remained still, watching, waiting. Remy took it as his cue. He approached the fallen beam. He wedged the pry bar into the gap between the beam and the queen's hide. He put his shoulder into it and heaved. The beam resisted his effort. It was solid durasteel, weighing tons. He repositioned, found a better angle, and tried again. Every muscle in his back and shoulders strained. His wounded arm sent a throbbing pulse of pain up to his shoulder. He strained, a low grunt escaping his lips, his boots slipping on the slick floor. With a final, lung-bursting effort, the beam shifted, just an inch, but it was enough. The queen let out a low hiss and, with a surge of her remaining strength, dragged herself free. The guards clicked and moved toward her. She looked at Remy, then at Zeller, tilting her head. After a long moment, the giant creature nudged one of her sentries aside, clearing a path toward the generator control panel. Zeller rushed to the panel, her Omni-tool already displaying her father's schematics. "The primary coolant pumps need re-engaging first," she said, her voice a mix of awe and urgency. She directed him, pointing to levers and buttons. "Now, reroute the primary conduits. That one." Remy followed her instructions. With a final heavy thud, he threw the main breaker switch. A low hum rose, rapidly building into a powerful thrum. The generator spun to life. The dim energy lights flickered off, replaced by the bright, clean light of full power. The light revealed hundreds of merc stalkers clinging to the cavernous room's walls and ceiling, all watching them in silence. They remained motionless, a silent, pale army. They walked up the hundreds of flights of emergency stairs to the monolith's apex. The merc stalkers they passed in the corridors and stairwells moved aside, their clicks soft and curious. The broadcast control room was at the tower's apex, a circular space with panoramic windows, showing the rolling, ash-choked sky. The consoles, now brightly lit and humming with power, were active. Remy sat at the main console. He worked the controls, his fingers stiff and sore. He bypassed the standard Simian protocols and configured the array for a wide-band multi-spectrum distress call. He encoded his own interspecies relief corps identification signal into the message, a digital signature for a ghost. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "It's ready." He looked at Zeller. He slid the chair back. "You do it." She stepped up to the console, her small hand hovering over the large, glowing activation panel. She took a deep breath, looked at him, and pressed her hand down. A massive surge of energy hummed through the tower, a vibration that buzzed in their teeth. From the spire above them, a beam of focused energy shot up into the poisoned sky. Then, silence. They waited. Remy slumped against the console, his body heavy with exhaustion. Zeller curled up beside him, her head resting on his leg. They waited as a full day-night cycle passed, listening to the sky's silence. Doubt settled in. He replayed the facts. The fleet had gone. The deadline passed. The sky silent. His gamble had failed. He had saved the child from the flood only to strand them both on a dying rock. He must have dozed off. A new sound woke him. A deep, reverberating roar that vibrated through the control room's glass. The sound of atmospheric engines. He shot to his feet. A frantic pulse hammering against his ribs. He peered out the window into the thick, grey soup. A brilliant white light descended through the ash clouds. A voice, wonderfully, beautifully familiar, crackled over his helmet comm, which he'd retrieved and left on out of sheer habit. IOC Commander Ranger Falco. Remy, is that you? We read a ghost signal from your old beacon an hour before this. One came through. I had a hunch. Turned the Perseverance around. The Concorde brass can have my stripes for it. Remy's legs trembled. He looked down at Zella, who was now awake, her gold-ringed eyes wide as she stared at the approaching light. A heavy rescue shuttle, its hull emblazoned with the IRC logo, settled onto the monolith's broad rooftop landing pad. The ramp slammed down and 2 medics in full enviro suits rushed out. Remy scooped Zella into his arms. She was so light, he carried her out onto the roof, into the shuttle's bright wash, his legs shaking with exhaustion. The pilot, Commander Kovor herself, stood at the ramp's top, her helmet off. She looked at him, her jaw tight, but her eyes shone. Remy just looked at her and said, "You took your time." The IRC flagship Perseverance's medbay was starkly clean and white, the antithesis of serene. Medics had cleaned and patched Remy up, and he was sipping something hot and sweet that one had pressed into his hands. Zella sat on a nearby biobed, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her fur already regaining its healthy liquid silver sheen. Commander Kovor stood before him, crossing her arms. "You faked your own death, stole IRC property, and disobeyed a direct order during a mandatory fleet-wide evacuation," she said, her voice a low monotone. "You realize the court-martial is going to be a sight to behold?" "Yes, ma'am," Remy said. She stared at him for a long moment, then her severe expression cracked, and she shook her head. "That was a damn fool thing to do, Remy. It was also the most IRC thing I've ever seen. Good work, Sergeant." A soft chime sounded through the ship's intercom, followed by an announcement in the melodic clicks of the simian language. Kovor listened, then looked at Remy. "We picked up Zella's parents from the refugee fleet as soon as we confirmed your signal. They're on their way." Zella perked up. She understood. She recognized their voices. The medbay doors slid open. The 2 simians from the landing pad rushed in. Their eyes found Zella and they froze. For a heartbeat, the medbay was still. Then the mother let out a choked sob, and they surged forward, collapsing around their daughter in a desperate, tangled embrace of silver fur. Remy stood, moving to the doorway to give them their moment. He leaned against the frame, watching the reunion. A warmth spread through his chest. This was why he stayed. Remy was packing his small kit, preparing for transfer back to his unit quarters. The authorities already assigned Zella's family to a simian resettlement ship. It was time. Time for goodbyes. Zella's father approached him. He stood before Remy, his hands opening and closing, as if trying to find the words in the human tongue. The debt... He trailed off, overcome. He placed his hand on Remy's shoulder, his grip firm. Remy nodded. The grip was enough. He turned to leave. He had to go. "Remy!" He turned back. Zella ran to him. She wrapped her arms around his legs and hugged him with all her might. He could feel her small body trembling. Her fur pressed against his fatigues was completely smooth. And a low, happy hum emanated from her, a vibration he could feel through his uniform. He knelt, his knee cracking, and returned the hug. He held her tight, blinking back the sudden, sharp sting in her eyes. When he pulled away, he stood and looked past her. Through the medbay's main viewport, it showed the starfield, a vast black canvas peppered with the brilliant, distant lights of 1,000 suns. For the first time in days, he thought of his own journey home. He thought of a little girl with a gap-toothed grin and a love for drawing messy stars. he would have a new story to tell her.